Let's settle the Baldur's Gate 3 versus Diablo 4 debate for good. 2023 has already been an absolutely stacked year for genuinely awesome video games. Largely beginning with the release of the Dead Space remake back in January, the string of bona fide 5 out of 5 hits hasn't let up ever since, with the likes of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Final Fantasy XVI, Street Fighter VI and so many others being responsible for setting a new standard within their own genre fields. Diablo 4 is another one of those games, if you can forgive it some of the odd seasonal misgivings, easily considered one of the best fantasy RPGs of the year, that is, at least until a little game called Baldur's Gate 3 recently released. On the surface, there's a lot of similarities shared between Baldur's Gate 3 and Diablo 4. They're both set within an incredibly detailed fantasy world, take place from an isometric perspective, and let you do battle with all types of creature. However, it only takes dipping into both of the games for just a split second to know that there are also some very drastic differences. Namely from the fact that one is very much a classic style ode to Dungeons & Dragons that places choice at the forefront, while the other is a more action-centric experience that emphasizes the never-ending pursuit of loot. The good news is that both Diablo 4 and Baldur's Gate 3 are some genuinely great 2023 releases, but if you're wondering which of the two should start first, or maybe even which one to start at all, then we're here to let you know which of the two games is best suited to set your wizard staff aglow. The main difference between Baldur's Gate 3 and Diablo 4 in terms of the story is that the one told in the latter is very much predefined. Similar to Diablo 3, and pretty much every other Diablo game before it, the narrative in Diablo 4 focuses on the daughter of hatred, Lilith, who is stirring up trouble in the world of Sanctuary in order to seek revenge on humanity. You have no influence over the events of Diablo 4 and its story beats, which will all play out the same with every playthrough. The opposite, however, is the case with Baldur's Gate 3. Set thousands of years after the events of the first two Baldur's Gate games, Baldur's Gate 3 is the perfect jumping on point for players wanting to get swept up in a fantasy world where they can somewhat control the narrative. You do this by making decisions and choosing different dialogue options with almost every problem and political conundrum you come across. Some will even lock out certain side quests that you otherwise would have been able to see. Baldur's Gate 3 casts you as a survivor trying to get rid of the tadpole in your head that will eventually turn you into a mind flare if left unchecked, but this is very much just the basis of a story that you are then able to guide. Diablo 4 doesn't have what you would traditionally call a main character. Canonically, players take on the role of a wanderer thrust into a wider story happening around them, but they are very much a blank template that other, more interesting side characters like Lorath, Inarius and even Lilith herself can then react to. Rather, Diablo 4's emphasis is on its unique classes, and there are 5 to be exact, which you're able to build in a way that controls and handles in a way that suits your own personal preference. The way, say, a necromancer interacts with the world can be very different to the barbarian, but Diablo 4's main character is always a conduit regardless. By stark comparison, Baldur's Gate 3, being a wildly more story-heavy game, offers players both options, to play as your own custom-created character or a pre-made one, complete with their own origin story. Even when creating your own character out of a plethora of different design and background options, however, they can grow to become quite nuanced through the actions they take. Multiple hours in, you could be fooled into thinking that a custom Baldur's Gate 3 character is actually one designed by Larian. Alternatively, as mentioned, any of Baldur's Gate 3's potential party members can be assumed as the player character, and therefore offer more depth. Arguably, the way Baldur's Gate 3 and Diablo 4 are most different is in how combat is treated. Diablo 4 offers a gauntlet of different skill trees specific to each class, whereby players can craft their perfect build by choosing to pour skill points into distinct active skills that could see the action play out very differently. On top of this, combat in Diablo 4 takes place in real time, meaning there's no waiting involved with regards to attacking the enemy, even though there is an element of strategy that comes from having to manage the cooldowns of your various abilities. Diablo 4 is definitely the go-to option for the more action-centric gamer, as well as players who enjoy the combat grind. Baldur's Gate 3 once again takes a more methodical approach in terms of its combat, asking you to manage the attacks and defense tactics of the entire party of heroes as opposed to just yourself. Your player character has a multitude of different ranged and melee attacks, as does the rest of your team, but all happen in sequence in traditional turn-based RPG fashion. Rather than the player and enemy team occurring one after the other though, the turn order is often randomized between both sides, forcing you to think ahead and catch a breath. This is in stark contrast to Diablo 4, where you'll likely be managing the hellish hordes at a quick pace. The world of Diablo 4 is presented as one contiguous map, meaning you can travel from one end of it to the other without coming up against any breaks or load screens, even though this is somewhat unlikely. This gives Sanctuary though a very different feel compared to how it worked in previous Diablo games, whereby players had to hop around to new areas via portal. It makes the version of Sanctuary in Diablo 4 feel closer to a living, breathing place, one that smoothly transitions from the sandy dunes of the Dry Steppes all the way up to the rainy green fields of Skosglen. Complete with dungeons and cellars, Diablo 4's world is punishing, dark, but also fun to explore. Baldur's Gate 3's world is also mostly interconnected, but the expectation is that you won't have as many reasons to go back and revisit areas you've already been to. You'll move from the beachside starting area, for instance, all the way up to the titular city of Baldur's Gate and beyond, picking up side quests and errands that will encourage you to explore wider areas that you likely otherwise wouldn't have wanted to go down. The world of Baldur's Gate 3 is also a lot lighter in terms of tone and theme compared to the one in Diablo 4. So in short, it's a much nicer place to be in, despite the impending personal doom faced by the game's central party. Gotta hate those tadpoles. All of the main differences shared between Diablo 4 and Baldur's Gate 3. Two very similar looking games on the surface, but once you dip under the hood there are plenty of differences that may make or break your decision to play one over the other. Which one do you plan on playing first or spending the most time in? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the Mirror Gaming channel. Until next time, thank you so much for watching.